Hello and welcome to the bike show once again, which is coming to you from a bridge. More on that in a second, after I tell you that later in this episode we'll be hooking up with the team from Fired Up and we'll also be bringing you some international biking news. But back to this bridge, which is over a river called the Allier. I come here quite often, well, not here exactly, but it's where I often walk the dogs, and I've wondered, as you do, where exactly does it come from? I live in a town in the hills, so in theory it can't be too far from here, unless French rivers can flow uphill or something. Well, I'm going to scratch the mental itch that is this nagging question that I've got about the source of the Allier, because I've got a bike that will help me get there no matter what kind of terrain I happen to meet along the way. And it's a bike that should make the journey fun, entertaining, and as a bonus, I should be able to do it all on just the one tank of fuel. As long as my Quest doesn't exceed about 450 kilometres, the 23-litre tank on this weapon of distance destruction should cope, no problem. The Super Adventure has been around since 2015, was updated in 2017, and now gets another dose of refinement and technology for 2021. The visual similarity to the previous model is deceptive because KTM is claiming over 90% of this version is totally new. The level of gadgets and riding aids has been turned up to 11 with an anti-dive function if you want to soothe your passenger's experience, or pretend to be a GS for a while. The cruise control gains some radar for a new level of autonomous riding, and the semi-active suspension gets some new programming for more accurate interpretation of the rider's needs. Components that remain the same are the brakes and the 19-inch front and 17-inch rear wheels. If you want ultimate off-road ability, then the 21-inch front wheel of the Super Adventure R is calling you. The S looks suitably modern as well, imposing, insectoid and, well, in a class of bikes not noted for their good looks, it's not exactly pretty, is it? If the Super Adventure has got a face that only a mother could love, then it's got a body that every father would absolutely respect and adore in a son, because this is an athletic machine. I mean, this is a big bike, let's not beat around the bush here, it's big. But when you get going, I mean, cliche or not, as soon as you start, the weight, it's just gone. I rode the 890 Adventure a couple of weeks ago, and no word of a lie, this is easier to steer. It takes no effort. I mean, never mind a bit of pressure on the bars, you just don't seem to need to. All you do is kind of vaguely point a shoulder or waft your chin in the direction you want to go, and it drops into a turn and off it goes. It's a magical trick they've done with the chassis. It really is super impressive. This latest update is a major one for the Super Adventure, despite the bike basically looking like it did last year. And let's make one thing clear. Last year's bike was already very, very good, and I had no complaints about its handling. And yet now, riding this new version, you realise that KTM's engineers have improved things considerably with just a few cuts and tucks, moving the headstock back by 15 mils, steepening the head angle by just over a degree, rotating the engine forward by 2 degrees. These are all small changes that combine to produce some significant results. The chassis updates have reduced the seat height too, making it easier for those without a basketball player's DNA to feel comfortable, though the seat height is also two-way adjustable for height. And then there's the devilishly clever electronic suspension that can be adjusted for preload and damping characteristics as you wish, though there are the 4 presets of comfort, street, sport and off-road, and then the auto setting that will constantly adjust to the road conditions and your riding style. I've been playing around with it in the auto setting for suspension,
And you know, and you kind of day-to-day touring and you're just averagely having a look at the scenery kind of way, you might as well leave it in there, because it's quite amusing. It does give you a super plush ride. It's just that if you decide suddenly to have a bit more fun and up the pace a bit, then it, especially at the rear, you notice it gets a bit boingy. A couple of good bounces before the computer decides, hey, oh, something's going on here, we need to firm everything up a bit. Otherwise, I just leave it in street most of the time. The performance settings is a bit too hard and jiggly, because the roads, good as they are, occasionally get a bit bumpy, you know what it's like.
This Allier river that my dogs and I know so well starts somewhere here in the Auvergne, not too far from the source of the Loire, which is France's longest river. 421 kilometres after the Allier begins, it joins the left bank of the River Loire in central France, which then goes on to empty out into the Atlantic after 1,006 kilometres at Saint-Nazaire. The Loire is more famous than the Allier, but not necessarily any more interesting, and that's the sort of relationship the Super Adventure S has with its more famous sibling, the R. If you want to concentrate on off-road riding without too much tar road in your life, if you don't ever want to take a passenger, and if you have the required high level of skill in the dirt, then the R will be your model of choice. But for most potential customers, the S is the more suitable, especially here in Europe where, as I've mentioned many times before, the opportunities for long days and weeks of off-road adventure are extremely limited. The last 1% of this continent will be opened up by the S's off-road ability, but the vast majority of its attractions are accessible by road. A tourer biased toward this sort of riding is what's needed here, and the Super Adventure S is exactly that sort of bike. That is quite the construction, I think you'll agree. 1879 they built it, so suspension technology was bang up to date in those days, and it used a lot of steel, which got me thinking about a news piece I want to bring you about steel in the modern age. Technology doesn't last as long. Well, you say that. Harley Davidson are doing all right, making bikes that look pretty much like they made about 70, 80 years ago. And you may remember that I brought to you news a couple of weeks ago about the fact that Harley Davidson and Indian Motorcycle, to be fair, were in danger of really suffering business-wise in Europe because the EU was about to slap a 56% tariff on all American motorbikes. Now, this was in response to Mr. former President Donald Trump having slapped tariffs on European steel, and obviously this was a move by the EU to get the American manufacturers running to President Biden to try and get the tariffs reduced. Well, it appears that that has worked. America hasn't reduced its tariffs yet, but EU has said, okay, at least you're trying, we'll back off for a couple of months at least. So good news for Harley Davidson and Indian, because that could have crippled their business in the all-important European sector. Well, I think it's time for me to get on the bike again. It's time for you to go for a short break. Join me again when hopefully I'll be a little bit closer to the source of the Allier. Welcome back. I'm a little further into my quest to find the source of the River Allier with the help of KTM Super Adventure S, which is already making a serious impression. I don't think I've ever ridden a bike which has got so many different characteristics all rolled into one. I'm falling in love with the thing, I really am.
Well, I thought it was too good to be true. Nice fast road from Langeac. I can still taste the coffee. And I'm deviating too far from the river, so hopefully this will take me back closer to it. Ah, here we go. It's going to be a day of bridges, that's for sure. That's a nice one. And here we are. Still massive. Yeah, the river's a bit wide. I don't seem to be making much progress.
It's quite difficult keeping an eye on the river, or any of the scenery for that matter, because the roads around here are just spectacular. This might be a touring bike with off-road pretensions, but in sport mode it handles like a big race bike, so it's difficult not to be seduced by the delights of this monstrous V-twin motor and end up travelling so quickly that the only sight you ever see is the vanishing point of the next corner. The engine is now compliant with Euro 5, but that hasn't diluted any of its pleasures. Each cylinder now has its own radiator to help keep the inevitable heat build-up better controlled, but there's still 138 Newton meters and 160 horsepower waiting to be enjoyed whenever the fancy takes you.
That's undoubtedly a worthy headline number, but to be honest, strange as it may seem, 160 horsepower really isn't that amazingly special or out of the ordinary for an adventure tourer these days. But horsepower is to miss the real strength of this engine, which comes from its capacity, nearly 1.3 litres, remember. And that means that this motor, this massive twin, is all about torque. And there's just an epic amount of the stuff from basically 0 RPM. Just a little twist is enough to give you more than you could possibly hope to handle on a little road like this. There's so much of it, in fact, you can make super rapid progress on a mountain pass without ever really revving it past 5,000 RPM, and that's only halfway towards its red line, really. There's that much of the stuff, and this is where the real beauty of the engine is, in how easy it is to ride quickly. And what's really a special significance on this motor is that it's incredibly smooth. 2 massive pistons banging away underneath me, and yet the engine is civilized and sophisticated and is quite happy to trundle around now. 5th gear, 65 k's an hour. KTMs used to shudder and just have a real mechanical tractor-like feel at low RPM, but here we go, I'm down below 60 k's an hour, 5th gear, through a tiny little village, quiet engine, and I can roll on. Look, no shuddering, no shaking. That especially is a massive improvement over the previous model. The river curves along here into the valley, and it seems to be getting ever steeper, the valley sides that is, and the road is just not playing ball. I keep going up the sides of the valley, and this time the road looks like it's completely gonna leave the river behind, so I think what we'll do is cross over to Fire It Up back in Johannesburg and catch up with what they're doing at the moment while I cheat and have a look at Google Maps and see if I can't find out where I'm going to find the Allier again. Well, as always, there is something hugely interesting going on at Fire It Up, and also, of course, with Hero motorcycles that are gaining a real strong foothold in South Africa and at a quick pace. Back here, on top of this basalt bit of rock, I have discovered through my epic Google exploration that just up here there's a hydroelectric dam and a lake which has forced the river underground above that, so I'm going to have to head off up over this plateau and hopefully find somewhere to rejoin the river as soon as possible. So I'm going to get ready and head off. Why don't you take a short break and I'll see you in a moment.
You rejoin me on my quest to find the source of my local river aboard KTM's Super Adventure S. And being lazy, I've stopped to admire the view. Again. That's the Allier down there, and at last it's beginning to get a little bit smaller, which is giving me hope that I might actually find where it starts. It's difficult to concentrate on the KTM, good as it is, when every corner you go around has got these incredible views. The Auvergne, if you ever get a chance to come to France, forget the Alps, I'm telling you. The Auvergne is where it's at. There's a greater variety of road in this region than there is in the Alps, And they are a lot less crowded too, not just with traffic, but also with police.
Well, the scenery's really changing now. The road's getting twistier and twistier, and I want to kind of ride as quick as I can, but the scenery just keeps opening up, and wow! That's exactly what I mean. Who wants to go too quickly through this? So there's the Allier. It's got a lot smaller now. I'm glad I found it again, because I was feeling a bit lost. So it looks like we are going to cross it and head up the other side of the valley. Probably to the next little village after that. Potholes? I'm back in South Africa. So this is a properly minor road. It's almost turning into gravel. Right, this is the part of the journey where I start to get a little nervous, because obviously it's not tar anymore, but it's not a bad looking road. Gravelly, gets a bit loose in places, a little bit thick, which is always a bit nerve-wracking. I just love how easy it is to swap from bonkers superbike mode on the road and turn off onto a bit of gravel and go flickety flick on the switchgear, which I have to say is much better than it was on the previous generation. But I've got off-road suspension, off-road ride mode, which means I've got a softer response on the throttle. I've changed it to ABS mode for off-road, and I've done all this without getting out of the seat, without even stopping. You can do it on the fly. Oh, wheel spinning, Durrans, catastrophe beckons. That's the amazing thing though, the way these bikes look after you these days. I mean, I can even, let me try it. Oh wow, I can even hold on a bit of front brake, and instead of locking and skidding and going down like the good old days, that ABS just does its thing and stops you quickly. So much for the old mantra of not using the front brake off-road. Actually, for a big old thing, it feels remarkably easy, even for a complete incompetent like myself. I mean, my speed is, okay, I am in third gear. Wow, I'm doing about 70 k's an hour. Yeah, it's glacial, let's be honest. My speed is glacial. I can see occasionally through the trees what looks like a little valley for the river that I'm following, but I'm not convinced. I could be getting lost. Although, hello, yellow signposts. Are we in luck? I'm about as high as this hill goes, so you'd think I've got to be close.
It's only a small sign, but it says the Allier begins in this direction, so it's time to abandon the KTM and use my feet, which almost results in the first crash of the day. Well, that's it then. After 140 odd kilometres of riding, I'm probably only about 50 kilometres from where we set off, but I should have figured. Lots of twisty mountain roads, and I found the source of the Allier, but I don't know what I was expecting. A big rainbow with a pot of gold and a gushing waterfall, but it's a little hollow in the ground and it's slightly damp. But this is where the mighty Allier starts, so I have fulfilled the quest. And the bike has been, well, nothing short of brilliant, really. What an absolutely amazing machine. Genuine improvement over the previous model, which was already pretty damn impressive. Is it perfect? No, no bike ever is. And because it's a KTM, I'm going to do my usual thing, which is to moan a bit about the seat. Come on. I mean, really, come on. It is a touring bike. Yeah, it's brilliant, but it's flawed, and I haven't even mentioned the elephant in the room, which is, of course, the radar. The radar-assisted cruise control. But Don's going to do a piece on that in detail in the future, so keep an eye out for that. I'm just going to say, yeah, it's a valuable addition. It can help on a long journey. If you're stuck on the motorway, yeah, it'll help, and you can just latch onto the car in front. However, I didn't use it very often because the electronics did throw me a wobbly on more than one occasion. The electronic suspension just shut down and kind of reverted to a really hard sport mode, it felt like, which made your kidneys liquidize and your vision go blurred. It would reset itself every so often. I don't know why it would turn itself off, but it was a pain, and it makes you distrust the electronics on the whole. So I didn't want to do too much with the radar, because I just figured, well, what if it's like the suspension? Is it going to turn itself off and run me into the car in front? This isn't the first time I've had issues with KTM electronics on test bikes either. But to be fair, none of them have ever left me stranded by the side of the road.
Why now? First time today.
Still, it is a bit worrying. Overall though, I'd have to grit my teeth, ignore that side of things, and buy the Super Adventure S anyway. It really is a special bike. And as a dedicated road rider, I found it more engaging even than the Super Duke GT. Well, that's it for this week. That's all we got time for, I'm afraid. So we will see you again next week on The Bike Show.